Thanks everyone for joining us for today's episode of The Capitalist Investor. I'm Mark Tepper, got my boy D with me.
What's up, Mark? How you doing?
What's up, buddy? I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you.
Good. Well, for today's show, let's talk with our listeners about building an accurate financial plan.
All right.
Because I think there's a lot of incorrect financial plans out there.
Right.
A lot of wrong financial plans for one reason or another, and I want to kind of go through a list of some of these things that may cause your financial plan to be wrong so that listeners, when they do go through the financial planning process themselves, they're able to identify those issues and make sure that their plan is giving them the right answers.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I'd say the last thing you want to do is have a plan put together that says you can retire perfectly at age 55, 60, 65. And then when you're 55, 60, 65, you realize that it was not going to happen that way.
Right. That's definitely not what you don't want to have happen. And
come up a little short.
Yeah. And, you and I are in the same boat. We've seen all kinds of, financial plans, walk into our offices throughout the years. And it's a huge issue. And it's really no one really teaches you what a financial plan is, right?
Right.
So someone out there looking to retire, they have no idea what a financial plan should be and shouldn't be.
No idea. And then you've got commercials on TV for shops that are offering free retirement blueprints.
Right.
What's that? I can tell you there's no way that's a real financial plan.
No,
There's no way.
Mm-hmm. Probably takes them, 25, 30 minutes to put together?
Yeah, and it gives them a chance to pitch whatever it is they're selling.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think that's a pretty good point right there. I mean, when we're putting together a comprehensive financial plan, our plans typically take us between communicating with the clients to make sure we're getting the right information, working on the plan, fine-tuning everything. It could take easily 15 to 20 hours.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. For sure.
And that's what you as a consumer should want. You should want an accurate financial plan. Right? Free is no good if it gives you the wrong answer.
Exactly.
If your free plan tells you that you're fine as long as you save $1,000 a year for the rest of your life, that's not going to do you well, right?
No doubt. And again, all pretty much all of those plans that we see come in through the door, all were pretty much marketed that way that you just described, and all are, fairly worthless. Let's be honest.
Yep. So let's start off, D, by talking about one of the biggest issues that I have seen, even if the financial advisory firm is working with legit financial planning software. I'm not talking about retirement blueprints or whatever that hokey stuff is, right? I'm talking if they have a real financial planning system in place. D, one of the biggest issues with it is every single financial planning software comes preloaded out of the box with historical rates of return.
Right.
And future expected returns are much lower than historical rates of return.
For sure.
So, I mean, I had a conversation with a client, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks ago, and we had built a financial plan for him, and he was interested in the return expectations that we were using. And he was under the impression that we should be using 10+% for the annualized returns, right? And I understand why, right? So, D, I pulled up some numbers here. Since 1930, the S&P 500, the total annualized return when you include dividends, 9.5%.
Right.
Okay. Over the last 40 years, so starting January of 1980, 11.88%.
All right.
Okay. Over the last 30 years, that's from January of 1990, 9.96%.
All right.
So you're understanding why he thought 10% was a legitimate number to be using, right? Then we go over the last 20 years, so that's from 2000 on, and it's 6.28%.
Oh, wow.
Big drop there.
Yep.
Right? And I can tell you that our financial planning software in particular comes preloaded with a 9.4% return expectation for U.S. large cap stocks.
Yep.
That's ridiculous. That is too high. I mean, don't you want to kind of aim low and hopefully you outperform?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the worst things that could be contained inside of a financial plan is to have return expectations too high and not hit them, right? Because if you're counting on getting 10% per year, year in and year out, and we'll talk about how that actually gets calculated inside of planning, because that portion of it is important as well. But if you're counting on 10% per year rate of return to make your retirement plan work, you're probably going to be in for a rude awakening at some point.
No doubt, man. No doubt. So 9.4%, that's crazy. Bonds are expected to do they come preloaded at 4.4%.
Right.
Now, what we are expecting, so, we kind of take a look at the capital market expectations that a lot of the big firms put out. And I printed off Northern Trust, but we also, we use JP Morgan. I mean, we take a look at all of the resources that are put out by the big firms, and we try to arrive at our own, right? So rather than using a 9.4% in U.S. large cap stocks, we're using 6.5%.
Right.
It's more realistic. I would rather my plan work with a 2% return than to have it work with a 10% return,
right,
and I don't get the 10% return.
For sure. Yep. Because, and a huge part of what we're talking about right now is really just the levels of where we are at right now, right?
Well, we're at all-time highs,
yeah,
right?
So expecting 10% on top of those all-time highs just doesn't really make sense logically.
Yep.
If you sit here and just think through it. It would be great if it happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, if we were talking March 15th of this year, it's a different story.
Right.
Those return expectations still shouldn't have been 10%, but maybe they were a little bit higher,
right,
because the S&P was at 2,300 or wherever it bottomed at.
No doubt. Yep. And actually, since you mentioned that, as I was preparing for the show, we did tweak our return expectations in our planning software up a little bit at the lows, and now we got to tweak them back down a little bit. So,
yes, exactly.
Something that we're doing actively as a firm, things like that, that probably a lot of people out there are not doing.
Yeah, right. So, just to be clear, if you have a financial plan, a good financial plan, a comprehensive plan that's probably a 100+ page document, right? And you're working with a financial advisory firm, one of the first questions you have to ask is you need to ask them what their capital market expectations are that are built in the plan.
Right.
Now, I know when we pump out a complete plan, it's all listed in the appendix, right? So it's important that you take a look at that, because if your plan is supposedly, quote unquote, successful at 9.4%, it's a completely different story if you get 8, 7, 6, or 5, right? So I think that's the most important question you should ask, even if you've already had a financial plan done.
Right.
There is I would have to say, D, that, and this is completely just anecdotal, but in talking with other financial advisors, I bet you 90% of wealth management firms do not change those returns. They work with whatever the preloaded software gives them, right?
I came up with exactly 90% too.
That's right. That's gotta be right.
But yeah, pretty much 9 out of 10 plans that I see or hear about or things like that, it's something in there at a very top level is blatantly wrong. And by wrong, I mean is going to drastically overstate their chances of success.
Yep.
Which we don't want to do, right? Like you said earlier, we want to start with the minimum, right? And hopefully some good results will add on top of that success. We don't want to say, hey, if we hit it out of the park, your plan will be okay. And then if it doesn't happen, then we're scrambling.
Yep. So if you already have a plan put together, ask the advisor that put it together for the return expectations that were built into the plan.
Yep.
Have them show it to you. If you haven't done a plan yet, that is an important question to ask before you engage a financial planning firm.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
All right. I already mentioned retirement blueprints, right? They're throwing them around for free, right? That brings us to the next thing that we need to talk about, D, which is a cash flow based financial plan versus a goal based financial plan.
Right.
Right. Most of the people that I work with, they are not as concerned about making sure that their money lasts exactly as long as they do. They're more concerned about optimizing their wealth.
Right.
Right. And in a goal-based plan, or I have no idea what these retirement blueprints are, but I agree with you. It's probably a 20-minute process, right? You enter some very high-level information. You apply an inflation rate, right? Which, that's something we should talk about too, right? If you're doing a financial plan at home, chances are you're not applying inflation to the income you need, right?
For sure.
You're not looking at tax consequences and stuff like that. In a goal-based financial planning software, one of the big issues is inflation, right? So if you think about it, let's say your mortgage payment is $3,000 a month, okay, and you got 15 years left on the mortgage. That mortgage payment's not going to go up.
Right.
It stays level, okay? In year 16, your expenses drop by $3,000 a month.
Right.
Right? So if we were putting together a goal-based financial plan for a person that's in that kind of a situation, and they tell us their total living expenses are $6,000 a month, which includes the $3,000 mortgage payment, if they were to tell us that, I completely lost my train of thought here.
I know where you're going with this one, and
Edit this one.
it's really a great point. On a cash flow based system, right? Things are going to change, things are going to fall off the page, and non-fixed costs like groceries, gas, electricity, all that stuff is going to go up by the rate of inflation. So, I think we're using about 2.5%, 2.56, something like that in our financial plans currently.
So you have to apply different inflation rates to different expenses.
Right.
Right? And you can't just do a global inflation rate. You need to account for the fact that mortgage payments drop off. Right? You need to account for the fact that half of that $6,000 a month is not going to increase. Right? That's going to help you to get to a more accurate plan. What are some other differences, D, between a goal-based plan and what we believe is the best method, which is a cash flow-based plan?
Yep. So really you kind of nailed it there with the expenses, right?
Yeah.
I think that is honestly probably one of the most overlooked aspects of financial planning is coming up with an accurate budget, right? And you don't need to get it down to the penny every single month, right? We don't need to know that you're spending, $38 every time you get your grass cut or whatever, right?
Yeah.
We just need an accurate kind of compartmentalized budget of kind of your spending money, living expenses like your mortgage and electricity, things like that. But most importantly, and this is for my clients for sure, dealing with them directly, what your goals are in retirement, right? Because your spending isn't going to stay static, right? You're going to hit that retirement button, and just like all my clients, and I'm sure all your clients as well, they have goals. They have things they want to do.
They're not trying to just barely skate by.
Right.
Right? I mean, especially if you think like the first 10 years of retirement, first 15 years, I guess depending on when you retire. We have some clients who retire at 50. We have others that work until they're 70. But, let's just use 60. Right? If you retire at age 60, you're probably going to want to live it up for the next 15 years or so.
Right.
Before you hit maybe 75, and then from 75 to 80, it backs off a little bit, right?
For sure.
So I've actually seen expenses go up in retirement.
No question. I would say specifically for me in the first 5 years for sure, that's the time when people, they have their bucket list and they want to attack it, right?
Yep.
So, the big trips to Europe or wherever back in the old days when we were allowed to do that stuff, travel to see family, right? A lot of people have kids and grandkids out of town. While they're working, they just don't have a chance to see them that much. They want to travel to see them as well. A lot of my clients, especially now, My favorite, downsizing the home, right? So that's a pretty big financial transaction that in a cash flow based system, you can pretty much nail exactly, what that will do to your overall financial plan. In a goal based plan, that most likely won't even be discussed.
Yep.
So, a lot of people find out when they go to downsize, and they're selling their house for, $300,000, right? To downsize that house into a newer model is actually going to cost them more money.
Yeah.
So you're downsizing from 3,000 square feet to 2,200 square feet.
But it's brand spanking new.
Brand new.
Beautiful.
Fancy stuff inside. And that house is going to cost
zero maintenance. So you
exactly.
got the maintenance fees and all that.
Oh, yeah. Got the grass cut and all that good stuff.
Which is great.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt. But you got to factor that in.
Yeah. So, typically that difference is 100,000 plus, right? So we got to figure out, do we finance that? Do we take it out of cash? How are we comfortable in doing things like that? Really, one of the best features to a cash flow based plan is to be able to answer the questions that you have.
Right. Every financial decision that you have to make can be addressed in a financial plan.
For sure.
Now, do you always do what the financial plan tells you to do? Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, paying for a house in cash versus financing it. Let's take that as an example.
Right.
Interest rates are 3 to 4%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're low. If the return expectations in your plan are 10%,
mm-hmm.
you definitely should not pay cash for the house.
No.
But let's use a more realistic rate of return. Let's use like a 6-ish% like we would use. It still makes sense to finance the house.
Right.
Because why would you take money that's costing you 3-4% and sacrifice making 6-7% on it?
For sure.
Right.
And some people's primary savings are all in their IRA or qualified plan, so then you have tax implications on that as well.
Yeah.
So all that stuff can be addressed in a cash flow based plan. And like I said, these plans that we see from outside sources, they just don't take any of that stuff into account.
Yep. Next thing I want to hit on, D, and you already kind of talked about this, but in a goal-based plan or retirement blueprints or whatever these 20-minute financial plans are,
Mm-hmm.
They use straight-line returns.
Right.
Right. So if we're using, what are we using, 6.5?
Yep.
If they actually tone down the returns from 9.4 to 6.5 like we did, let's give them the benefit of the doubt there, which they probably didn't do. If they tone it down to 6.5%, the plan is going to assume that they get 6.5% every single year. Well, wouldn't that be great?
That would be awesome.
Right? To know that you're going to get the same return every single year.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't work that way.
No, it does not.
Right? I mean, what if you retired, as an example, and I have a client or two who retired in January of this year.
Mm-hmm.
You retire with the S&P at all-time highs, and 2 months later, the S&P lost 50% or 37% of its value, whatever it lost. Right? That happens.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Right? So, those big negative years, especially early on in retirement, can have a devastating impact on your financial plan.
No doubt. Right.
So whenever we're putting together a cash flow based financial plan, there's going to be variability in the returns.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So a 6.5% return that we might be using for stocks. Now, keep in mind, we don't have very many clients that are 100% invested in stocks.
Right.
Right. They're going to have some bonds and stuff like that in there. So let's use a blended rate of 5.5%.
Okay.
Right. That might have a standard deviation of 10%, right? So, those returns, one year they're going to be 5.5, the next year they're going to be -5. And basically what happens in these plans is it's called a Monte Carlo simulation. And it randomizes all the returns, runs thousands of trials to figure out, is the plan going to work under any and all conditions?
Right.
Right. And that's what you want to know. I don't necessarily want to know that if everything works out perfectly and I get my same return every single year, that it's going to work. I want to know what happens when the real world stuff happens.
For sure.
Right.
And the Monte Carlo simulation is really the only way to do that, right?
Yeah.
If you are just assuming a flat rate of return in your retirement plan with a standard deviation of 0, basically saying I'm going to get 6.5% every year forever, you are drastically overstating your chances of success, because that's not going to happen.
Yep.
And even though you may average 6.5%, while you're pulling money out of those various accounts in retirement with those fluctuating prices, that right there is really one of the main concerns about your retirement plan lasting.
Yes.
If you're pulling money out at different stages of the wherever you're invested in, when you're pulling money out at lower points, you're actually putting yourself much further behind. And if you are not accounting for that, like using a Monte Carlo summary, you are really, 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 maybe one more time, really overstating your chances of success.
Well, D, and that's, when we are working with clients, the so-called financial experts tell us that a Monte Carlo score of 70% or better is a good score.
Right.
That means of the thousands of trials that were run, 70% of the time there was at least $1 left at last life expectancy.
Right.
Whether you use 90, 95, whatever it might be. Okay. $1 left at last life expectancy 70% of the time. When you're looking at a goal-based plan with straight line returns, where it's trying to figure out, are you going to have $1 left at last life expectancy? That's like the 50th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
So you're setting yourself up for failure. If you want a 70% or higher plan, a goal-based plan, all that's ever going to tell you is what you're going to do if you're in the 50th percentile. Right? So not what you want, right? You got to have some wiggle room. You got to have some room for error. Life happens, things change, and you got to have a buffer in there. So 70% or better is what the financial experts tell us is a workable plan. D, typically for our clients, we like to see them at 80% or higher.
Yep.
Right.
And just for some numbers to that, for a video I'll be putting out later, I did a quick case study. So just real simple. Say 65-year-old, $1 million of investable assets, spending about $40,000 in addition to their Social Security. If I use those numbers that we talked about, like a 5.5% rate of return, a 8 or so standard deviation, at the end of the plan, the median case for them is about $519,000.
Okay.
So that means
positive.
At age 95, and their Monte Carlo score is 80.
Yep.
So, that is what I consider a nice working plan. There'll probably be some money left over. All right. So that median case is $519,000. If I use a flat rate of return of 8%, all right, that same plan, changing nothing besides the rate of return, the median case will be $1.96 million.
Big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge difference. So,
and one's realistic and one's not.
Yep. So, it may feel good to see $2 million left at the end of your plan, but is it going to be realistic?
Yep.
Right. So those flat rates of return, big no-no.
Yep. All right. So last thing I want to touch on here, D, is how tax is calculated in the different planning softwares.
All right.
The way tax is calculated in the real world is we are operating under a marginal tax system.
Right.
Right. The first few dollars you make are tax-free, and then it's 10%, and it goes up from there. Each incremental dollar you make can potentially be taxed in a higher tax bracket.
Right.
You compare that to a goal-based plan. Typically, what goal-based plans use is a flat effective tax rate.
Right.
Right. So, look, if you're making $100,000 a year, you're in a 20-something% tax bracket,
mm-hmm.
but maybe you paid $12,000 in tax on your $100,000 of income.
Right.
So your effective tax rate would be 12%.
Mm-hmm.
If the plan were to use a 12% effective tax rate, you're never, ever going to have any opportunities to optimize your tax situation, right? Hey, should I do a Roth conversion this year for 15 grand, 25 grand, you'll never know.
Right.
Right. In years where you may have a Hawaii vacation and, a vacation to the Greek Isles or wherever you want to go, in years when you have those vacations planned and you need to pull 25 grand, 30 grand, whatever that big time vacation is going to cost, when you need to pull that out, it's not going to be taxed at that 12% effective tax rate.
No.
So that's another issue, D, that I see with these goal-based plans is they're oversimplified.
For sure.
Now look, I'm not saying a goal-based plan is the worst thing in the world. It's better than having nothing.
For sure.
Right?
Directionally, it tells you kind of where you're going.
It's a good starting point, but I think it's, as you kind of graduate from there, you need to begin to use more realistic numbers. You need to use the way the tax code really works. And I think the only way to do that is through a cash flow-based financial plan where the advisor is 100% using realistic rates of return.
Right. Another example that just popped into my head, say towards the beginning of retirement, someone has a large cash savings. So they retire, and the first 2 years, let's say, all of their money is coming from their cash savings account. Yep. Okay. Not probably the most ideal, but it definitely happens, right? People are getting closer to that finish line, and they feel more comfortable having more money in their savings account. Well, let's say that couple, let's say they're both 65. All right. And they have no Social Security, no taxable income whatsoever. Pulling money, a small amount of money out of IRA accounts with no other income can be a good move because you'll pretty much get taxed at 0% up to a certain point. All right. That's something that you can plan for and look at and analyze in a cash flow based system. As you just mentioned, that's not going to be something that's even going to be on the radar of that goal based plan, right?
Yep, without a doubt. Now, one last thing, and we're wrapping up here. I'll toss the question to you. How often do you think people should update their financial plans? Because if you had something put together 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the thing's stale.
Yep.
Right? I mean, what's your suggestion? I'd assume that for someone who's 40, it's going to be different for someone who's 60.
Yep. I'll start with the pre-retiree, right? Within, let's say, 3 to 5 years of retirement or in retirement. It's pretty much got to be every year, I would say. And I would say every year up into retirement and maybe a year or two afterwards. After you're kind of into retirement and everything's planned for, it doesn't necessarily have to be every 12 months on the dot, but it most certainly needs to be looked at on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And because things change, right? And I see it all the time. There's people retire and they think one thing's going to happen and they get into retirement and something completely different happens.
Yeah.
And your financial plan needs to be adjusted, right? That's what it's there for, to be able to help you make those decisions.
And it'll give you the yellow light or the red light when appropriate, right? Like,
For
hey, slow down your spending, right? Because we see that happen. We see situations where clients overspend, right? It's not a bad thing, but it's something that we need to go back into the plan and fix, right? So that the plan's reflecting that higher level of spending.
I mean, that's a great example, right? So let's say you're 1 year into retirement, you thought you were going to spend $60,000 a year, which is pretty much everyone's standard answer. Yeah. Everyone spends $5,000 per month. But at the end of people's career, people really aren't budgeting that much, right? They're probably making the most amount of money they've made in their lives, probably pretty comfortable. So, let's say we enter in $60,000 for a financial plan. After 1 year, we're doing a refresh. They actually spend $80,000.
Yep.
We can have a conversation about it. If 5 years goes by and they're overspending by $20,000 a year, and then we can sit down again, we're probably not in a good spot, right?
Yeah.
So having that plan looked at,
you can reroute,
updated,
recalibrate when you're updating it often enough.
For sure, just hugely important to do. And not to mention the peace of mind that gives, at least my clients, and I know your clients as well.
Yep.
That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about financial planning, I should say. Anyone can just generate one of those goal-based plans and say, hey, we're going to be great, right?
Yep.
But sitting down, seeing it in detail in front of you on a piece of paper, kind of knowing you're going to be okay. Yeah, I've seen it dozens of times. You can see the weight lift off of people's shoulders.
It's all about the peace of mind.
It is really, really important to make sure that, when you enter in that next stage of your life, that you're prepared. That's really what it comes down to.
Without a doubt. And I'm just going to wrap up by making one last comment. Financial plans are not just necessarily about figuring out if you have enough money to get to retirement and to get through retirement. For a lot of people, they're already confident that they're going to have enough money, but they want to optimize their situation, right? Whether it's passing assets on to their kids or charity, maybe it is minimizing taxation, right? All that stuff can be done in a real financial plan.
Right.
Financial plans are not just about, can I retire? So
That's a great point.
Want to be crystal clear on that.
Yep.
All right, everyone, thank you for joining us today for this week's episode of The Capitalist Investor. As always, check out the show notes. If you have questions, you can click on either my bio or Derek's bio, shoot us a message. You can shoot us an email at info@swpconnect.com. Check out our YouTube channel, and we'll talk to you next time.